They called me the strap-plow husband before they ever learned my name. I heard it in 3 languages before I understood any of them, murmured behind fans and armor visors whenever Queen Odessa Vrae Solène crossed the windbreak holdfast's threshing yard to find me elbow-deep in grain silo resin. The treaty that ended the border war had put a queen in a farmer's boots. Her mother's court signed the marriage clause the way you sign a surrender, because the alternative was worse. Nobody explained to the 12 honor guard captains why the treaty required Odessa to live on my holdfast for 1 full growing season before the crown could seat her again. Only that it did, and that it made her, in their eyes, something less than she'd been. She never once looked at me the way they did. That was the part nobody in that yard understood. The first week she was here, I found her standing at the edge of the threshing floor in ceremonial boots that had never once touched dirt, watching me reset a grain silo valve with my bare hands like it was some lesser cousin of statecraft she was being made to witness as punishment. I didn't explain myself to her. I handed her a second wrench and told her to hold the seal steady while I worked the bolt. She looked at the wrench the way I imagined she'd once looked at a scepter, like it couldn't possibly be meant for her. Then she took it, and held the seal steady, and didn't let go until I told her she could. Her captains watched that too, from a distance, the same distance they kept for 6 months, close enough to guard her, and far enough to make it plain they hadn't accepted a single day of it. They called me things in their own tongue that they assumed I couldn't parse: dead weight, borrowed husband, the treaty's leftover farmer. I let it pass over me the way weather passes over a good roof. I had work to do, and she kept coming back to help me do it, and that was worth more to me than whatever 12 armored men murmured behind their visors. I want to be clear, I never thought of it as an insult worth answering. I fixed what needed fixing. I taught her how a grain silo breathes, how frost-line irrigation reads the soil before the soil admits anything's wrong, why you patch a resin seal from the inside out and not the other way. She learned faster than any captain gave her credit for, and she never once told them so. I think she liked having one place in the galaxy where nobody expected her to be a queen. The alarm came at nightfall, the way alarms always seem to. Every relay tower between the holdfast and the capital lit at once. A warning broadcast repeating in that flat emergency cadence that never changes no matter which world you're standing on. Descent pods, dozens of them, breaking atmosphere over the shepherd grain belt. Not a fleet, not soldiers. The scanners called them something the honor guard had never logged before: spore devourers, seeded generations back by some long-collapsed agricultural experiment on a moon nobody had checked on since. They didn't want territory, they ate. Metal, fiber, resin, grain, wiring, insulation, anything with structure, they stripped down to component dust in hours, and they bred faster than anything could burn them. The honor guard did what honor guards do. They stood in formation in the yard with charge rifles humming, waiting for a fight they understood. It didn't come. The devourers weren't a wave you shot. They were a fog that rolled in low over the grain, thousands of them, small enough to slip through a rifle's kill radius without ever giving it a target. Energy bolts passed clean through swarms that thin. By the time the captains understood that, half the east silo's support struts were already bare frame, and the charge rifles were starting to eat through their own barrel coatings from something in the swarm's exhaust. Odessa stood in the yard in her traveling cloak, watching 400 years of her mother's military doctrine fail against something with no chain of command to negotiate with. I watched her captains look at her like she should have an answer. I watched her have none. I had one, but it wasn't a weapon. It was resin. The same silo patch compound she'd learned to mix with me all season, a slow-cure sealant built to breathe and bond under pressure, so a grain silo doesn't split when the frost hits, sets in open air within minutes if you thin it wrong on purpose. Thinned wrong, it doesn't seal, it nets. I'd made that mistake twice as a younger man, cursed both times over a ruined batch. I remembered exactly how to make it again on purpose. I told the yard foreman to strip every irrigation line on the property and run them to the silo pumps. I told 2 of the honor guard, the ones who hadn't yet decided I was beneath listening to help me rig the pump heads into a fan spray pattern across the grain rows instead of the usual soaking drip. Odessa didn't ask me to explain it twice. She just asked what she could carry. We sprayed the whole east field in bad resin before midnight. Thin, tacky, useless for sealing anything, perfect for exactly what I needed it to do. The devourers came down into it the way water comes down into a drain. Their wings caught, their legs caught. The ones that tried to eat through it found out too late that a bad resin batch cures around whatever's moving inside it, not away from it. By the second hour, the fog over the grain had gone still and heavy. Thousands of small shapes fixed mid-motion like insects in old amber, and the pods behind them, guided down by whatever signal the swarm had been sending back up, followed the same low path straight into the same field, and stuck the same way. Nobody in that yard fired a shot after midnight. I don't think anyone quite knew what to do with a war that ended in glue. The senior captain, the one who'd coined dead weight, though he didn't know I'd ever heard it, came to find me somewhere past the second hour, when it was clear the field had gone still for good. He didn't apologize. Men like that rarely do, not in words. He asked, instead, how I'd known a swarm bred for consuming reinforced hull plating would drown in a compound meant for grain silos. I told him the truth. I hadn't known. I'd known the compound, and I'd known what happens to small moving things caught in a cure they can't outstruggle, and I'd bet the whole east field on the rest being close enough to the same problem. He stood with that a long moment, then went back to his line without another word, and I noticed he didn't stand quite so far from me after that. Odessa found me at the edge of the field a little before dawn, resin-stained to the elbow same as me, watching the light come up over a field gone the color of amber glass. Her honor guard stood back at a distance I hadn't asked for. I noticed before she said anything that none of them were looking at me the way they had at Nightfall. They'll write this up as a treaty failure, she said. A queen who couldn't command her own defense. Let them write whatever keeps the grain safe, I said. She looked at me a long moment, the kind of look I'd learned by then to just let happen instead of filling with words. You knew the compound would fail on purpose before you ever asked anyone's permission to try it. I've ruined that batch enough times to know exactly how it fails, I said. Figured it was worth ruining on purpose once. She didn't laugh, not quite, but something in her face came unguarded that hadn't been unguarded in front of me before. Not since the treaty put her in my boots and my yard and my name. Behind her, I watched her senior captain lower himself, slow and without ceremony, onto one knee in resin-slick grass, and the rest of the honor guard followed him down without a word from anyone, the same 12 who'd murmured strap-plow husband behind their visors 6 months of growing season ago. Odessa didn't tell them to rise. She let them kneel to the field, to the dawn, to whatever they needed to kneel to before they could look at me straight. Then she took my resin-stained hand in both of hers, in front of every one of them, and held it the way you hold something you finally stopped being told to be ashamed of. Windbreak holdfast holds, she said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear it, and so does its husband. Nobody murmured anything after that. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the field had gone quiet and gold and perfectly, permanently still, and for the first time since the treaty was signed, nobody in that yard was waiting for her to be a queen instead of exactly what she already was, mine, and I hers, in a season neither one of us had asked to survive together, and both of us glad, in the end, that we had.